So I'm Charlene Chevar, Policy Officer on Mercury at the European Environmental Bureau, which is the largest network of environmental citizen organization in Europe. And I'm also part of the Zero Mercury working group. And I had the chance to contribute to the latest skin lightening campaign of this group. And yeah, I will be your moderator for today's session. So why are we here today? Well, as you are probably aware, mercury is often added to skin lightening products as a way to lighten skin. However, this is a big issue because it has a serious impact on health, but also on the environment. And that's for those reasons that many national laws have banned those products, but also the Minamata Convention has provision on it and prohibited the manufacture and the trade of mercury-added product, skin lightening product, and this became effective in 2021. Yet, it seems that those products remain really available online, and that is why today, together with the Zero Mercury Working Group, as well as together with the government of Antigua and Barbuda, we would like to present you new evidence on the magnitude of the problem, as well as go into what can we do about it in terms on the legal side and policy side. But before going there, I would like to turn first to our first panelist, Dr. Leroy Christian, who is co-organizing also the event today. Has a small introduction. So, Dr. Leroy, you are currently the director of the Department of Analytical Services of Antigua and Barbuda, and this department is responsible for the analysis of products for human consumption and environmental health monitoring. You are also the chairman of the Pesticide and Toxic Chemicals Board and the focal point for the International Chemicals Treaty acceded to by Antigua and Barbuda. And so, yes, Dr. Nero, maybe you could tell us a bit more about the situation in Antigua and Barbuda and what is actually the cosmetic work that you are doing over there. And yeah, what can we do about it also on the national level? So yeah, please, the floor is yours.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Charlene. And so to the Zero Mercury Working Group for co-hosting and organizing this event. So the next slide, please. We're really here to speak about the Mercury-Added skin lighteners and the role that Antigua Barbuda and certainly the region will play in adding to information and data about these potentially dangerous cosmetics, and also the context of the Pacific Vanilla Program project. So the previous slide, sorry.
Leroy, I think, yeah.
The previous, back here. Sorry, just to give an idea of the, for those who may or may not be aware of the convention, just a reminder of the areas of control, the obligations as set out in Article 4 and would have been elaborated in the annex of the convention as it relates to compact fluorescents, the high pressure mercury vapor lamps, cosmetics, medical devices, and also to paragraph 3, which would indicate measures in relation to dental amalgam. And all of these are areas of particular focus for Antigua and Barbuda, and for which measures have been taken in most areas, some of which are guided by policy, but others really guided by work within the private sector that would have made strides, particularly with respect to dental amalgam and mercury lamps and medical devices. So next slide, please. Most would be familiar within the countries who are either party to the convention or who sought to be party to the convention and would have participated in the Minamata initial assessment process. And in that process, the particular areas of interest are highlighted using the toolkit to ascertain the major areas of releases, emissions to the environment, and we would have identified a few key areas. The consumer-based products, 29.6% of emissions or releases of mercury to the environment per year would have been flagged as significant. Other intentional products as well and processes. Waste disposal, of course, is always a concern, particularly in island states where landfilling is the primary source of disposal, and issues regarding to burning of waste, which also contribute. And also, as you can see, with burning and or incineration, 28% of emissions there. So this improved waste management, of course, is one of the areas of high concern. Next. Also, within the MIA process, we would have had findings specific to cosmetics that were brought out and would have played a role in us formulating our specific international program project towards the formation of the Caribbean Region Mercury Monitoring Network. Within that small sample of 16 brands that were analyzed, two of them, one of which was readily available within the region, recorded very high levels of mercury in excess of 19,000 parts per million. And this particular cream is actually still on the market and pretty widely distributed within the region. If we look at the 1 ppm proposed limit, you can see just how far in excess 19,000 really is. And from that MIA process, one of the recommendations would be to impose a restriction or ban on such creams, because again, because of the informal nature of the production of such creams, you can expect not just mercury in some cases, but other heavy metals that may be of concern. Next slide. So based on this preliminary result and the project that was subsequently written to address these particular issues related to mercury-added products and mercury within the environment and in humans, we would have partnered with the Biodiversity Research Institute and Integrated Health Outreach, and NGO here in Antigua, to formulate a project which resulted in us collecting 98 different brands of skin lightening creams and an additional 41 soaps, lotions, and gels, which are readily available over the counter or available online. Of these 98 brands, the ones that were considered to be above 1 part per million were available from either the US market, the European market, from Africa, and also from within the Caribbean. So there were 10 particular creams that were above 1 part per million. And this is via screening with the X-ray fluorescence, which is a handheld portable machine, which really is a screening tool. And we would certainly conduct more specific analysis later on. But within this initial screening, 3 of the creams would have actually turned up greater than 1,000 part per million. So there are 13 such creams at this point that we would want to focus on, but we still have other analysis to be done via direct mercury analyzer in coordination with our colleagues from the Biodiversity Research Institute to determine of the additional creams, which ones were above 1 part per million, but certainly less than 10 part per million, which would still be of concern. So we do have some of these creams that are really a cause for concern that we will certainly uncover within the next few months as the screening and analyses continues. Next slide. So within the specific international program project, we would hope to expand as one of the focal areas, citing that we are also looking at mercury in biota, such as fish, and also in humans utilizing hair samples. And in our previous side event, we would have gone through some of the preliminary data. But the skin lightening creams, because they are so ubiquitous and so freely available, easily available, we have particular interest in expanding the database on cosmetics by making available the information and data that we would have collected already to our regional partners, and also to get from them which creams are available within their markets, to provide, of course, additional samples so we can increase the statistical robustness of the study. And through our network, the Caribbean region Mercury Monitoring Network, to have over the next few years, even outside of the SIP project, a robust and broad database of creams that are available, and to provide not just testing services, but also collaboration and research as it relates to these creams. Of course, addressing the issues of online sales and the informal production is also of concern, because we can recognize that these creams can be formulated anywhere and by anyone. And therefore, we have to ensure that we know the full scope of what is going on within our region. And we hope that within the participating countries, which are currently 8, spanning from Belize to Guyana, that we can, of course, over the next few months and into the next year or two, expand this database. Next slide, please. And I think it's no secret that the mercury that is contained within these creams does have very direct implications for the user, but also secondary impacts to persons within a household, within the immediate environment, and of course, children are of also immediate concern, because we certainly have to develop an idea of what the impact is, not just again to mercury, but also other contaminants, because of course, as was stated before, the informal nature of the production would lead to potentially other contaminants posing a risk. And of course, there are other ingredients to the cream, such as hydroquinone, which we still also have to evaluate. So on a national level, there are other concerns which are outside the scope of the convention, but hopefully within our network, we can address other issues that are of human health concern. Of course, on the disposal side, there is a concern that once these empty containers and spent material goes into the environment, that they will also cause some concern, given the state of disposal in some countries. And if, of course, they are areas of wetlands and other areas that could cause the biomagnification of mercury in biota, this is something of concern. We have to engage other sectors, because there are certain societal and social impacts of the use of skin lighteners, issues that go beyond the convention as well, but there's certain stigmas associated with it. And certainly this collaboration with other partners to look at these social impacts would be of some importance. As it relates to the economic side, we do have regional organizations. We do have the Caribbean community and issues of trade and the economic implications of bans, imposition of bans, would have to be discussed, because again, some of these creams are manufactured within the region and freely distributed, and therefore there is need for discussion on how these creams are in fact marketed by countries who have strong trade relationships. Next slide. Now, within the last 2 years, we have recognized the role that illegal trafficking is playing or has played with the issue of mercury. It was brought to our attention, the confiscation of mercury that has been crudely transported in vitamin bottles, for instance, which are literally filled with mercury, or transported on flights, along with other chemicals that lead to very serious and potentially life-threatening situations. And through consultation with our airport authority, it's reliably indicated that, of course, this goes against any regulations for transport of such substances. It has implications, of course, for customs and border control, because this substance consignment of mercury would have passed through at least one country on its way to Antigua, and certainly would have originated certainly within our region when it was transported on this commercial flight. So there are some safety concerns, and as to why such quantities of mercury would be used and in what sector. We have our suspicions, of course, but if it is being used informally as an additive to skin lightening creams, that still has to be determined. But there are religious practices and other informal practices that we know have gone on in the past, and seemingly might still be going on, and therefore we have to ensure that we investigate this thoroughly. And we've had some discussions with our regional partners where the shipment would have been originated, and that will be ongoing for some time as we try to elucidate what really is going on with respect to the illegal trafficking of elemental mercury. And as it relates to the current exemption in Annex A for traditional practices or religious practices, I think that is something that doesn't actually uniquely affect Antigua, but we have a particular interest there because there's a potential negative impact. Next slide. And just a brief overview of our way forward as it relates to our work, not just with skin lightening creams, but with our specific international project. Certainly, we want to ensure that any action taken is an informed one, and therefore the role of science in this, not just the project, but our regional focus is extremely important. And with our collection of data, information, and our scientific investigations, ensure that we can adequately provide this policy level and on public level education that would ensure that we take a prescribed action as it relates to the banning of certain substances and the phasing out and use of alternatives is extremely important. Capacity enhancement is required, and certainly the projects, the funding available through UNEP and the specific international program, for instance, and bilaterally through different organizations will help in ensuring that we collect the requisite data, because again, we have to determine from a scientific perspective the quantifiable levels in certain areas. Of course, the other collaborations we've had have led to the development of a policy on mercury-added products. And we will be seeking the ministerial endorsement. We do have the Ministry of Health that is on board, and we have to ensure that this policy is formally implemented, which would provide a systematic approach as to how we deal with mercury-added products. Within the medical sector, we do have actions being taken to not purchase medical devices that contain mercury, and this has been in place for a few years, but it is not stated anywhere, not elaborated anywhere. Within the government sector, compact fluorescents have usually been changed out for LEDs. But again, they're still available through the hardware stores and providers, and we have to ensure that we have prescribed actions as it relates to other mercury-added products. And we do have dental amalgam, which is not particularly used within the dental sector. But again, this is not a formally adopted practice. So we have to ensure that even in the disposal of amalgam, that the best practices are utilized. And as on the legislative side, the regulation that has been drafted that will be put forward to our minister to ensure it's part of our Pesticides and Toxic Chemicals Control Board Act to ban creams that are in excess of 1 part per million, and also to address the issue of online sales through legislation. This is discussion that was held preliminarily, and of course, Michael and David would expand on such things. And the regional discourse, of course, is required on the issue of cosmetics manufacture and the illegal transit of mercury. Next slide. So I just wanted to thank everyone for their attention, and I certainly look forward to the work that we have over the next year or so and into the future, and collaborations with our various entities, NGO partners, governments, and around the region. Thank you very much.
Thank you a lot, Dr. Leroy. Thanks for this very clear presentation. As you have highlighted it, skin lightening product is not just an issue for the people who use it. It is also an issue for the people around them, like the children, the family. And yes, it's not only that, there is also the issue of waste disposal and further environmental impact it can have. And yes, also it's not just a national issue, but it is a worldwide issue. And this is where we are going to go now, to look at the global aspect. And for this, I would like to turn to Michael Bender. So Michael, you are the director of the Mercury Policy Project, but you are also the co-founder and international co-coordinator of the Zero Mercury Working Group. You have 30 years of experience assisting governments in numerous mercury reduction policies, and you also co-lead, the Zero Mercury Skin Lightening campaign, and you have co-authored several recent reports exposing the issue around actually skin lightening product trade and so forth. So yes, Michael, so recently the Zero Mercury, just today, the Zero Mercury Working Group has just released a new report on this issue. And yes, could you please let us know about this new report and what are the key findings? So yes, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Charlene, and good day, good evening to everyone. First, I'd like to thank the Minamata Secretariat for hosting this event and for the government of Antigua for co-organizing. And as Charlene mentioned, my name is Michael Bender. I'm the co-coordinator of the Zero Mercury Working Group, and I'm going to be presenting on our latest report. Next slide, please. Zero Mercury Working Group is an international coalition of more than 110 public interest NGOs from over 55 countries. And among other things, we support the development and implementation of the Minamata Convention with the goal of reducing mercury in the global environment to a minimum. Next slide, please. As you can see, we have our NGO partners all over the globe, and we'd like to thank them for all their efforts in collecting the samples for the testing of the skin lightening products that I'm going to be talking about today. Next slide. So the Zero Mercury Working Group has conducted 3 separate investigations between 2017 and now, confirming the continued worldwide availability of illegal skin lightening products with high mercury content. Our main concerns are the health risks and the illegality of the products. And as others have already mentioned, in addition to the national laws and regulations, the Minamata Convention bans manufacture and trade of cosmetics containing over 1 part per million mercury. Our 2022 report echoes many of the recommendations made in our 2018 and 2019 testing reports and our 2019 enforcement recommendation reports. This report also includes new recommendations for legal online reforms, and these recommendations will be covered in the next presentation by NRDC. Next slide, please. As we've already heard, there's significant health risk of mercury-added skin lightening products. The symptoms associated with exposure are not unique to mercury, so it's often difficult to identify or diagnose, oftentimes until serious health effects start to occur. The regular use of skin lighteners containing mercury can lead to rashes, skin discoloration, and blotching, and long-term exposure may have more significant and harmful effects. It's important to note that the use of skin lightening products with mercury can also expose others through skin-to-skin contact and may even require home decontamination. Next slide, please. More broadly, we're concerned with the widespread use of skin lighteners globally, as it's a symbol of societies grappling with internalized racism and colorism. In some populations, greater than 50% of individuals have been found to use skin lighteners regularly, with one analysis estimating that over 27% of individuals globally have used skin lighteners at one time or another. And as you can see, the fact sheet here, it's been developed by the World Health Organization, and it warns of the health risks of certain skin lighteners and also recommends not using skin lighteners in general. Next slide, please. So while there are sales in both marketplaces and online, our concern, our focus here is the growing market share of e-commerce generally, and the challenges of regulating online sales, especially where the seller is outside the country. While non-domestic online sellers evade domestic laws that brick and mortar stores must comply with, the violations of the health and safety laws facilitated by the e-commerce sites not only threaten public health, but also create an uneven playing field for the businesses that are playing by the rules. Next slide, please. So this is just a little overview of our prior studies I mentioned earlier. In 2017 and 2018, with the assistance of our NGO partners from around the world, we purchased 338 skin lighteners from local shops in 22 countries, and about 10% contained mercury levels over the 1 ppm limit. Follow-up study was conducted in 2019, targeting those high mercury products identified in the 2017-2018 study, as well as others. Of the 166 samples analyzed, those purchased from e-platforms in some shops, over half had mercury levels over 1 part per million. And one example of our outreach work by our NGO partners in the US, the Sierra Club, launched a petition drive calling on Amazon to stop offering these high mercury and often illegal products on their website. Next slide, please. However, what we noted after the the 2019 report results were publicized and covered also in the news media, that the results appeared not to deter online platforms. It appears that most e-commerce platforms are not sufficiently motivated to verify the legality of the products sold. When the platforms were notified of illegal high mercury products, a common response was often that they voluntarily removed the products and/or they put filters in place as a deterrent. But since many of these sites aren't open and transparent, it's hard to determine how effective they were at deterring the online sellers. In fact, some products reappeared, as our NGO monitoring showed. As noted in the 2019 Zero Mercury report, follow-up investigations showed that the same brands found to contain high mercury levels on several sampling occasions in physical and via e-commerce platforms continued to be offered for sale. Next slide, please. In 2019, high mercury products were purchased on several platforms, including Amazon, eBay, and Flipkart, from South Africa's Bitterbuy, from Nigeria's Jumia, and from Lazada and Daraz, both part of Alibaba. Following the 2019 Zero Mercury study, most of the platforms were asked to stop selling high mercury products. Some did so, while others did not respond or claimed they had no legal obligation to do so. For example, Amazon India, in a 2020 response, stated, and I quote, "The products offered for sale on the marketplace are always owned and or sold by the seller at the point of time and not by Amazon." When Reuters reviewed these online platforms in June of 2020 in their reporting, they showed a continued listing of 19 high mercury products spanning all 7 platforms, including Amazon, Daraz, and eBay. Next slide, please. So after reviewing those responses and checking on various sites, we noted that many of these products were still being offered. So for our 2022 report, we enlisted NGOs from 17 countries who searched for over 80 suspect products containing over 1 part per million. And many of these products were previously identified by governments and academic researchers. Our NGOs purchased 271 products from more than 40 e-commerce sites, accessed from Asia, Europe, Africa, and the Americas. And that's an increase from the 13 that we accessed in our 2019 report. This time, we found that 36 brands contain high levels of mercury. In fact, 129 products with over 1 part per million mercury were found on 30 sites. The majority were accessed from multiple countries and continents through a range of online platforms. And on the left is one example of product purchased by Amazon. Thanks. If you could go ahead, please. The 10 most available high mercury products found online are listed here, and they're also pictured. I won't discuss them all, but some of the ones that really jumped out over time have been Phasia and Shanni and the Gori, as well as several others. Next slide, please. The online platforms that were found to be selling the most, the highest percentage that we sampled were from 4 platforms. First, more than half of the 40 samples purchased on eBay had high mercury levels over 1 part per million. And Shopee, Gigi, and Flipkart as well had nearly half or more than half samples tested over 1 part per million. Next slide, please. As you can see in this slide, it's a listing or a graph which lists all the various platforms, and some of these platforms have different access points. For instance, Amazon in the US has Amazon.com, there's Amazon India, there's Amazon in the EU and Brussels, and it goes on. So as you can see here, what the graph shows in blue are the samples that we tested, and orange are the ones that showed mercury levels over 1 part per million. Next slide, please. When we look at the country of origin, according to the packaging, most high mercury skin lighteners appear to have been produced in Pakistan, Thailand, and China. In some cases, we know, however, steps are being taken to curtail the illegal production. For example, there was a public notice action posted against a skin cream manufacturer by the Pakistan PSQCA, their standard agency. However, we caution it's very difficult to confirm the origin of these products because they are often produced illegally. There's a challenge of identifying those responsible and their methods, and there's also a role that counterfeit products play. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, there are a number of countries involved in Pakistan, in China, and Thailand, in Mexico, Thailand, and you know, this may be a good representation, but we would be looking for more research to confirm this. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned earlier, the recommendations of our report are going to be covered in the next presentation by David Lynette of NRDC. If you'd like more information, we'd encourage you to go to the zeromercury.org website and then go to the Skin Lightening Cream campaign page. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Michael. Thank you for this presentation and presenting us all the latest results from the last investigation. As we have just seen, mercury keeps being added to skin lightening creams. It is easy for anyone to find them and purchase them. And that makes them also illegal under national law and the Minamata Convention. And so it would be good to know what can we do about it on the legal and policy side to reform this and ensure that those products do not enter the market anymore. And to answer those questions, I would like to turn now to David Lynette. So David, you are an attorney now working with the Natural Resources Defense Council, the NRDC. But before that, you led the Maine's Bureau of Remediation and Waste Management, where you helped secure passage of mercury product laws in the country. Overall speaking, you have been working on mercury pollution issues globally, including development and implementation of the Minamata Convention on Mercury. And you also recently served as an observer on the Annex A and B review intersessional expert group. So please, David, the floor is yours.
Charlene, can everybody hear me okay? Can you hear me? Okay, good. I'm cognizant of the time here, so I'm going to try to move pretty quickly here so there's some time for Q&A. And let me also apologize in advance. It's 6:37 in the morning here, so I'm not at my best, but I will do what I can to give you the essential ingredients of our presentation here. Why don't we move to the next slide? So every country's situation is different in terms of how these creams manifest itself in commerce, but they can be grouped within three general categories. The first is where the illegal production is taking place. Michael pointed to a number of countries where there are suspicions, there's significant concentrations of production there. In other places, they're going to come in through imports because they're not produced in those countries. And I suspect that's the case in Antigua, for example. And then, as Michael pointed out, online sales is a global problem because these are showing up basically everywhere online because third-party sellers can be located anywhere on these platforms. So those are the three basic routes of commerce. And to address each of these routes, you need a separate set of, they're related, but you need a separate but related set of measures. Next slide. So where these are being produced, you need to follow the mercury, but also follow the mercury compounds. And that's the major message I want to send here. We have a mechanism in place in the convention currently to monitor the trade of elemental mercury. We don't have much in place on the trade of mercury compounds yet. In fact, there's a provision in the convention that asks the COP to look at this issue about whether mercury compounds should be subject to regulation, but the COP has not yet done that. And it is compounds that are most often the feedstock ingredients for producing these creams. So at the national level, you may or may not have a licensing and registration scheme for the use and for the import of mercury, but I suspect you may not have it for mercury compounds. And so in that sense, there are loopholes in the trade regulatory system, both at the national level and under the convention at the moment, if to get our handle on mercury compounds. I will also point out there is a document surfacing for COP about HS codes harmonization, and it would be important to be able to develop Mercury-Added specific codes for these products, including skin lightening creams, so that those who are theoretically coming in legally, particularly the eye area cosmetics, can be fully checked out and make sure they are really eye area cosmetics and not skin lightening creams in disguise. And then the last point I want to make here, which is really important, many laws, many national laws currently require full ingredient disclosure for cosmetics on the label. And to the extent companies are hiding behind the 1 ppm standard or claiming they have added mercury legally because they are an eye area cosmetic, the question then becomes, well, have they fully disclosed on the label that they're adding mercury? So they're either in violation, and in virtually all the cases that we have purchased stuff, mercury doesn't appear on the label at all. So they're either in violation because they're not disclosing the mercury in the first place, or they're in violation because they're adding mercury above 1 ppm to their skin lightening creams. Next. So on the trade side, and this is not just unique to mercury, this is the case, and many of these ideas have come from other MEAs, such as the Montreal Protocol on ozone trade, and other similar efforts where people are trying to go after the trade of illegal products. These are typical pillars of what it takes to combat illegal trade. I'm going to focus here on the first two and the last one, given the time constraints. So let's go to the next slide. So again, we need to get a handle on the mercury imports and uses and the mercury compounds imports and uses on the trade side as well. We have to make sure those imports are coming in for allowable uses. We need to understand the we need to prepare our customs people to be able to look for these materials, and we need to make sure the legislation in place that covers the illegal trade of these products have clear violations, whether it's providing false information, whether it's actually not registering for the use of mercury or mercury compounds, and the penalties have to be meaningful. If they're very light, it's just going to be a cost of doing business. Imprisonment needs to be part of the penalty regime for these kinds of violations in order to make them work. Next slide. And on the frontline capacity for our customs officials, we need to do a lot more to train them about what these creams are, how they can be detected. And as pointed out in the first presentation, we're going to need to provide them with the capacity to do field detection. of these creams because it's impossible to tell whether a cream has mercury just from looking at it. So that's going to mean XRF machines or Jerome meters or things like that. And it's going to mean follow-up lab capacity to make sure that the initial field equipment was accurately detecting the mercury creams. This is not something we've done well under the convention yet. Next slide. And it's something that we're going to have to increase our coordination efforts on. There are a number of existing enforcement networks out there under MEAs that are looking at other products. We need to start incorporating their activities into this set of issues. And on the convention side, there are a whole host of things we could be doing that we're not doing yet, and should be the subject of future programs of work. I've listed them on the slide. Let me just say that the first two are stuff that could be happening relatively soon. We need to be training our customs officials about what to look for and how to go about it. And there is not sufficient material available yet in a consistent and uniform way and in a very specific way to be able to do that. And we need to be thinking about capacity enhancement here and how to facilitate this purchase of field detection equipment for our parties in this convention, because it's going to be very difficult for them to negotiate that by themselves. Next slide. So let's get to the new emphasis of this problem, which Michael was pointing out to, and that's the online sales of skin lightening creams. This is a problem everywhere. And it's not just limited to mercury-added creams. In fact, there are a large number of studies out there looking at illegal products sold online generally, whether they're infant car seats or other cosmetic items or pharmaceuticals or the like. It's been well documented that online sales of products are a problem. And the reason for that is when the online sales regulatory apparatus was first created decades ago in many cases, the idea was to treat online platforms like newspapers. And so they wouldn't be liable themselves for basically communicating the product to potential buyers. They are simply relayers of information. That was the thought way back then. But the fact is, interstate commerce doesn't work like that anymore. The business plan for the platforms are to make a profit from each sale. Unlike newspapers, they control the content of the website and the terms of the sale. They often are the only entities in the country because the third-party sellers are located outside the country and therefore outside the jurisdiction of regulatory agencies or injured consumers trying to get legal redress. And in many cases, Amazon especially, they actually distribute the product. It's sitting in their warehouses and they actually distribute the product when the purchase is made. So these are not newspapers and they shouldn't be regulated like newspapers. They are very close to regular stores, brick and mortar stores, and need to be regulated accordingly. Next slide. So the situation currently is untenable. It's consumers are at risk and there's very little they can do about it. Policymakers are starting to recognize that the current situation is untenable. There have been calls for liability reform. The EU is actively engaged in looking at its legal framework for online sales and trying to sort out what to do about it. There have been court cases in the US where the online platforms have been held liable, particularly two recent cases in California. And there are cases in other states, but not at the national level yet. And so we don't have a national consistent way of dealing with this in the US yet because product liability is basically dictated by state law. There are efforts underway to look at the federal law that's governing internet sales in the US, but it's pretty fractured right now. And so it's going to take a while for that to happen. In the meantime, our enforcement agencies are starting to not accept the existing situation and are going after online platforms EPA went after Amazon for the illegal sale of pesticides, unregistered pesticides. The state of Washington went after Amazon for the sale of children's products that contained illegal levels of lead and cadmium. So this is starting to happen even with the current regulatory regime because the current situation is untenable. And I will let you know, WTO is looking at this issue in the context of developing global digital rules for online platforms. It's been a slow process, but just to warn you that this issue is going to come up in the WTO negotiations as well. Next slide. So as you and your governments are looking at reform efforts for governing online platforms, we offer you 5 principles to keep in mind as you consider those efforts. The first and most important is to not make a distinction between the way online stores are regulated and the way brick and mortar stores are regulated. There's no longer a sufficient basis for that distinction. And the other thing I want to emphasize here, 2 other things, is, for cosmetics in many countries, as I mentioned before, ingredient disclosure is required. It's on the label. We need to clarify the same should apply to online sales. Either they have to provide copies of the labels on the website where the product is sold, or they're going to have to make available an alternative method of full ingredient disclosure for what's in the cosmetics. Not only because of mercury, but because of other stuff that's in there. And the third-party sellers that are located out of the country, they should be required to consent to the jurisdiction of local courts and local regulatory agencies and appoint an agent that will be able to act on their behalf. That's the only way, other than enforcing directly against the online platforms, to directly get to the third-party sellers. So we're going to need both access to the platforms and access to the third-party sellers. We believe that once the online platform liability is clarified, they will do a much better job at policing their websites. Right now, there's really no incentive for them to police their websites because they're not on the liability stick. Once they are, and their lawyers realize they're potentially vulnerable, they will do a much better job at policing their website. And that's the first line of defense. Next slide. In addition to these measures on liability reform, there are other measures that need to be taken. Some of these I've talked about already in the context of the legal reforms needed, in particularly looking at mercury compounds. And I've talked about the capacity improvements that are going to be needed. There's also opportunities, a lot of opportunities for cross-government collaborations, particularly where established smuggling routes or other trade routes are established between exporting and importing country. Those 2 countries need to work together because the exporting country will have the knowledge about the supply routes, basically, and where the mercury compounds and where the producers are. And the importing countries obviously will have more knowledge about what's happening when it enters the country, and those 2 parties need to be talking to each other. There also needs to be opportunities for regional collaboration because it's difficult for governments to deal with this on their own. They need to be looking at how to share resources and what other kinds of efficiencies they can gather by collaborating with each other. So I realize I need to stop because the time is going and my moderator's been very kind to me. So I'm going to stop here and open the floor for questions or turn it over to the moderator.
Thanks a lot, David. And yeah, thank you also for your presentation and highlighting what we can do to also better enforce and remove those products from the market. And yes, I won't go too far. We still have 5 minutes, so we can take a couple of questions. I see that some of you put some comments in the chat. Okay, there is one question that sounds a bit technical, but so it's since we only guess the origin of the cream based on what the package says, is it possible in theory to confirm where the product was manufactured based on the specific formulation or the compound used? So it's a technical question. Dr. Leroy, do you feel comfortable answering to that question? So do you think that we could know from where the product was manufactured based on the composition of the product? Yes, the floor is yours. And you have 2 minutes.
I can say
Thank you,
something
Norm.
too after
Yeah,
the doctor's
Yes,
done.
thank you, David.
yeah.
Yeah.
No, but it depends on if you are going to trace specific compounds versus, well, not just mercury, but if you're looking also at other ingredients. But with a great degree of specificity from a technical standpoint, I think that would be somewhat difficult. So I can't at this time indicate, again, if we're looking at a particular isotope study that you could do for mercury, if you could trace that back, that may be possible to a certain degree. But again, we would have to really elucidate roots of the trade and where certain consignments of mercury may be coming from. That may be possible. I think but still, I think a lot of work within our region at least would still need to be done to track that, because it would be something of interest.
Yeah, I would just say a
David.
couple more things. It might be more possible where it's elemental mercury involved than where mercury compounds are involved, because you have an intermediate manufacturing process for making the compound. The other thing I would say is the complicating factor is the counterfeit issue. So in some cases, small manufacturers are basically outsourcing the production of these creams, and they're basically sending the creams to an outsourced manufacturer and sending the product they want to copy to the manufacturer and say, copy this, produce this and copy this for me. And so in that case, depending on how good the outsourced producer was, it may be really difficult to trace this back to its country of origin, because you basically have two different brands out there coming from two different places.
Thank you, David. It's less a question, it's more, I would say, a reaction about, let me check the chat. Yes, so the reaction is main ingredient of skin lightening products such as ammoniated mercury is not controlled by the Minamata Convention. It can be freely manufactured and traded as a mercury compound. And further, it says that the sale and use of mercury skin lightening products are not controlled by the Minamata Convention either. And the only controlling point is the manufacturing of the product. So yes, David, maybe you mentioned also the issue of mercury compound. Would you like to react to that?
Well, I think the thrust of the comment is well taken on the trade of the compound side. The convention does regulate the import and exports of skin lightening creams above 1 part per million. So in theory, these creams should not be imported into countries anymore that are parties to the convention. That's so. The problem is the enforcement apparatus, and the capacity to enforce that is challenging at the moment. There's just not enough thought and resources going into making that happen. And on the legal side, I think mercury compounds is the place we need to spend more time on.
Thank you. Dr. Leroy, you wanted to react as well, or because I saw you raise your hand? Yes.
Yeah, I mean, just to add that, I mean, there is the convention, yes, but I think countries have an overriding interest in this, because it is an issue of human health. The convention will not solve all the problems, and the convention cannot enforce within countries what needs to be done. So countries ultimately have this responsibility, and I think what we can do through the convention is make sure we have the mechanisms to get the requisite information, the data, to track what goes on, and to provide a platform for collaboration as well. But the countries ultimately have to put the measures in place, and they have to ensure either from a legal standpoint or other capacity enhancement, do what needs to be done to protect their population.
Thank you so much. I see there is also someone raising his hand, Dr. Marcus. I can take the question. We just please be quick because we really have to stop soon. So I will just give you. I can ask you to unmute yourself, and you can ask your question.
Comprehensive.
Okay, it looks like we cannot hear you anymore.
Okay.
Yes, can you? Yeah,
Yes.
go ahead. Yeah.
Yes. So I just wanted to say thanks to the presenters once again for the presentations. Like Dr. Christian, I am from St. Kitts and Nevis, so we are both from small island developing states, and so our first line of defense is really our customs departments, right? So even if persons order online, everything has to go through customs. My thing is, how do we about maybe strengthening the customs? Because I think one that Mercury probably isn't really on their radar with all of the other dangerous things they have to deal with. And from my standpoint, where I sit at the Bureau of Standards, we're very much engaged on labeling. We get lots of things with foreign languages and no English translation, and we depend on customs and so forth to stop these things. Clearly, you cannot scan every document, every package, and every container. But from the experience of the presenters, how do we go about one, raising maybe some more awareness and also helping customs to bolster their services in this area? And so thanks again.
Thank you. So I'm turning to the panelists. I don't know if one of you feel more comfortable to reply.
You can do it if
Yes.
it's okay with the others.
You can go ahead.
I mean, I've listed a few things that the convention could be doing to enhance capacity. I mean, ultimately, this has to be easy for the customs officials. So there needs to be a checklist, basically. These are the kinds of products that are coming in. There needs to be field detection equipment for these. So where they have suspicions, they need to be able to conduct field sampling to weed these out. You need a legal apparatus behind it, so it's clear the labels have to be in English or whatever language that you are requiring, so they're understandable both to the government and to the consumer. So there's a lot of things that we could do to make it easier for customs officials. And I'm hoping on the convention side, we can help make that happen, because it's going to be quite expensive for each government to prepare this materials on its own, and there's no reason for that to happen. A lot of this stuff can be happening collectively so that they can be used by all governments.
Thank you. Dr. Linroy, if you wanted to react, please in 1 minute, because we need to
Very
close
quickly.
the event.
Yeah,
Thank you.
absolutely. But certainly, and then David and I would have very briefly discussed the legislation, the regulation that we would have proposed that we would want to add to our Pesticides and Toxic Chemicals Control Act, where essentially creams that are coming in, such cosmetics, have to go through a process. So they initially would have to be cleared for importation, and a part of that would be to test. Have a testing regime that would over time be able to ascertain which ones are typically above 1 part per million, and those are prohibited. We have to take those measures and to put that to customs to implement that the creams are not to just enter the country. There are other approaches that were suggested, such as registration of persons who wish to buy such creams. Well, that may not be the most practical approach. So we still have some discussion to do, but I think the legal side would have to be tackled first, and to be in concert with what we can do from a scientific standpoint.
Yeah, I think registration of users would be particularly difficult. Registration of sellers might be possible.
No, yeah, sellers, I mean, not users.
Yeah.
Sellers, because there's very little manufacturing that would happen, certainly in a formal way, but the importers, sorry, is who
Right,
we would have
exactly.
to look at registering. But I think restricting them upon entry subject to clearance would be one way that we want to approach it. Very, very initially to do that, yeah.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Roy, also for the final words. Yes, so yeah, there is a lot of work that still needs to be done to tackle this issue. Let me just maybe finish by thanking the Minamata Secretariat of the Minamata Convention for giving us the space to participate and bring this issue forward. And also thank you to the government of Antigua and Barbuda for hosting this event, and of course to all the panelists and NGOs and partners who have been contributing to the last reports and bring the issue forward. So thanks a lot, and I give you back the floor to Ezago. Thank you. Bye
No
bye.
need to give me back. So
Okay, I saw
we're
you.
pretty close.
Okay, thank you very much, everyone. See you soon and stay in
Thank
touch.
you.
Thanks.
Yes.